to kind of wrap up what we've talked about for almost going on 2 weeks now, we're going to end things by talking about how our minds are shaped, okay? How we are influenced, how we are educate ourselves on what goes on in the media, okay? Stephen George works locally here in Louisville. I'll let him talk to you about exactly what he does because he wears many hats of what he does in the city of Louisville, okay? But he's going to talk to you guys about problems with the media, how it's a ratings game, how it's all about the number of clicks that you do, and then how if you don't follow up on certain things, what we've talked about in here with facts, then your opinion of a certain story may drift one way or the other, okay? So he's going to talk to you guys like a lot of dialogue, a lot of engagement, to where we just kind of ask questions. Ask the questions that you have about how certain things are, okay? So, Stephen, it's all you.
Thanks very much. Like you said, I'm Stephen George. My title is Executive Editor at Louisville Public Media. So, how many of you guys are familiar with NPR? Nobody. Public radio? So, WFPL is where we are, 89.3 on the dial here. NPR is National Public Radio. So, that's publicly funded media that cover a diverse range of things, national media. So what I do is run our newsroom here at WFPL, and that means helping to choose stories, edit stories, working with reporters and other editors to shape our news coverage of our community, of our state, and then also to work with NPR at the national level to bring in stories nationally. So, how many of you guys, I want to ask you where you get your news. So how many of you get it from, like, the homepage of, like, the Courier Journal or WDRB or New York Times, CNN?
WDRB, but I don't get over there, I don't watch it.
You watch them?
Yeah.
What about Facebook? Twitter? Snapchat? Where do you guys get news? Twitter? Twitter mostly?
Does anybody get news from somewhere we haven't said?
It's like the homepage on Yahoo or something.
Yeah, like one of those, like,
pops up.
where you have like the news section on the homepage, whatever, and they have weather and they have all that. Yeah. Okay. Do you know Washington Post? Okay. Do you know? So when you get something on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere on the internet, do you know where it's coming from? Like, are you thinking about like, oh wow, that's from CNN, so I trust it? No. Yeah. Anybody? Hmm? When you get news via like Twitter or Facebook, do you know where it's coming from? Like, do you look and say like, oh, okay, that's from the New York Times, so I trust sources? Yeah, you do. Okay, good. So, one of the things that we talk a lot about in media right now is how to compete in the digital space, and one of the ways that a lot of media outlets do that is through clickbaity headlines. So, I'm talking about clickbait headlines like, you're never going to believe what such and such said, and you have to click it, and it's like inevitably a letdown when you click it because it's like some kind of, well, he said some totally normal thing. It's not that interesting. There's a good reason for that, and I'm not saying I endorse the reason for it, but there's a reason for it. And the reason is that all of those media outlets get paid every time you click on that stuff. So it matters to them that you click on it, and that's all that matters a lot of times, right? So when you click on it, like, they know, we know, if you click on a story, how long you sit on that story, how far down the page you read, when you decide to jump ship and close the browser window, or maybe leave it open and just go on to something else. We know all of those things, and so when a media company gets a click, they have a broader profile that they merge with that, right? So they know, like through broader user surveys, for instance, that the vast majority of their users are readers or watchers or are like between 35 and 54 years old. They make roughly this much amount of money, and so they combine all of that with your behavior online and package that and sell it, right? So that's how they make money. We're a little bit different in public media because we rely on donations. So about 90% of our funding at Louisville Public Media comes from the public. So we will go on the radio a couple of times a year and go out and say like, hey, you rely on this. We're an unbiased, fact-based source of information, and you like it. We provide context. We do all these other things. And what's that?
Are y'all unbiased?
Mhm.
Alright, because I've been trying to be unbiased media.
Yeah. So that's actually a really good point. Yeah. We are, and I could name a lot of sources that I think are unbiased. But part of the issue that we're having right now in media and in political discussions in this country is that there's not a whole lot of faith in institutions like media right now, right? So I may say like NPR is unbiased, and somebody else might be like, no, I don't think so. And then where do you go from there, right? So I think that, for example, I think the New York Times and the Washington Post are excellent unbiased sources of information. But President-elect Donald Trump doesn't, right? I mean, he's been on Twitter talking about how the New York Times is against him for months, right? So for his followers and people who support him, what do you think they think about the New York Times when they see that? Right, right, exactly. So how do you then have a conversation about unbiased media with someone who already believes that the following sources of media are biased, right? How do you get past that? I don't have an answer to that. I think that is a question that media is really struggling with right now. How do you gain people's trust back? What do you guys think? Who do you trust? You said Washington Post earlier.
If you all need a news story and you want to say, well, these are facts, I believe that this is unbiased, who do you all turn to for news sources? WFAY.
CNN?
Negatives.
DRB? Okay. That's good. Google? So Google is interesting right now. Google and Facebook both are having a problem with fake news. And what that is again, I was sort of laying out the model for like clickbait earlier. So these are like individuals or organizations that make stuff up and put it online, and then they get like 2 million clicks on it or whatever, however many shares on Facebook, and they make money based on the ads that display on those individual stories. It doesn't matter if they're true. So right now, I guess over the weekend, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, posted on Facebook, like, here are the things that we're doing to try and figure out a way to block fake news. There's been a lot of discussion about whether fake news had an impact on the election recently, the presidential election. And, well, I think it's hard to say whether it did.
At least from what I've seen,
Mhm.
a lot of propaganda going on.
Sure. But I think part of the issue that we're facing right now is that we are all in these little echo chambers in our social media worlds, right? So if you spend a lot of time on Facebook, you spend a lot of time on Twitter, and you curate what you see. You decide who your friends are, you decide what sources to follow on Twitter, and you determine entirely whether you're thinking about it or not, the kind of information you see, the sources of information you get, and if that becomes a primary place where you get your news, then you are hearing only what you have decided you want to hear. I think that there's a sort of like paradox right now in our culture where we feel as connected as ever because of social media, but we are as isolated as we've ever been. And part of that isolation is having trusted news sources, having places to get information where you know that it is not going to come with a slant, or maybe you know it is going to come with a slant, and that's what you want. There are millions of people who tune into MSNBC because it provides a lefty slant on political news. Same thing with some of the programs on Fox. So, so those places have an audience because people like them. But there's also a lot of value in unbiased, straightforward reporting. And that's one of the things that we try to do in public media.
Are there laws or repercussions against some of these fake news outlets? Like, is there anything that says you cannot do that from besides a moral standpoint?
No. What's that?
Like the freedom of press or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Freedom of the press is part of the First Amendment, and it didn't go anywhere, I hope. It has been challenged by, the press is often called the fourth estate, being that we have the three branches of government and then the press to act as an extra check and balance. It was established that way because the founders of this country thought that every check and balance that we could have on power was good, was right, and was a smart, it's a smart way to do it. So what we have now in U.S. government and in state government here in Kentucky, I don't know how many of you all have been watching this, but the power structure in state government in Kentucky has turned in the last 2 years entirely in favor of one party. So what we will have in the federal government, you'll have the same party running Congress and the presidency. And in state government, you have the same party running the General Assembly, which is the local legislature, and the governor's office. So those sorts of situations, whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, call for a strong free press because there is when you have one party rule in government, you have the absence of one of the checks in the checks and balances system. So I would say that that the need for fact-based reporting and good, strong, hard-hitting journalism, investigative journalism, is greater than ever. But we're in an environment where it's harder than ever to find that and to distinguish it from a lot of the other noise that's out there. So I mean, it's always good to take questions. It's better than me sitting up here just talking. So what questions do you guys have? What are you thinking about? What do you want to know?
Questions about the media, questions about how they do things, why they do things, complaints with the media.
Happy to field your complaints as well.
Speak up, let's go.
You already touched on mine.
Clickbait. So how many people followed the story about the Vice President-elect Mike Pence and Hamilton over the weekend?
I don't focus on none of that.
You don't focus on what?
None of that. Like, I don't.
Politics?
No, politics. I'm not on the website.
Yeah, I'm not very good on
So it's kind of hard for me to ask questions when I don't. Like, you know.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not paying attention. I am.
Sure.
It's just hard to. I don't get on the internet like that.
Sure. That's okay. Do you follow other news? Not
I just
really.
take the weather app on my phone.
Fair.
Follow sports.
Yes. So this is another issue for media, right? Is how to capture people who are your all's age. I mean, how do we is it our job to get people to care? I mean, that's actually an interesting question that media faces right now, because a lot of media would tell you, I think people who are in my position would tell you that it is our primary job to report the facts and report news, and our audiences and consumers can do whatever they want with that, right? So what kind of obligation does media have to be interesting beyond that to you guys?
I feel like it only attracts like older people because it actually means something to them.
Mm-hmm.
As of us, we just come to school, go to work, and go home.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, it should care to us more because this is our future.
Yeah.
This really
I
isn't
think
their
it
future. They'll be
doesn't
gone
just
in a
limit
couple
to
years,
just
and then it's
older
us
people.
here.
I just don't care how the way it goes.
It's the problem with this generation.
I do.
So it's a good point. We got a lot to worry about in our individual lives, right? I mean, you got work, you got family, you got school, you got all these other things that are weighing on your mind, competing for your attention. What do you think the media's role is in competing for your attention, and trying to get your attention? Should we be trying more? Should we be trying to reach you guys and trying to tell you,
Yes.
hey, this is important for these reasons?
well educated on, like, the politics that are going on around us. It's because, like, in school, people think that you can't exactly be taught a lot about it because so many people are biased, and, like, parents get mad about, like, oh, they can't teach my kid that because for some reason. And so you don't hear it in school, so it's not much on the media, so you just don't, you're just kind of, uneducated about what's really going on.
So you have to really go above and beyond to find information.
You guys can broaden this outside of just politics,
Yeah.
we can talk about the race stuff we talked about. Well, what kind of news, if there's a news story, what kind of news story are you gonna click on to read about? Crimes?
Crime.
Either politics or sports.
Do you click on the stuff when it says something about JCPS school? Do you guys click on that?
Yeah.
No.
Unless it's saying it's no day.
Right.
Why not? It's boring.
Yeah. But it pertains to us, so that's why.
Sure.
Exactly.
Sure.
Like, this is hard.
If it's
So-
in my neighborhood or something, I'm gonna click on that, obviously. Where it's snow day, I'm gonna click on that. If it says there's gonna be a tornado or something, I'm gonna click on that. But
Sure.
other than that,
So it's sort of what pertains to your direct experience.
I mean, if I have a question, I'll obviously get on and search.
Right. Right. What about everybody else? Anybody else? So I brought up the example of Hamilton and the vice president-elect because it kind of touches on some of these things. So I know not all of you, but how many of you actually are sort of aware of that and what happened with that over the weekend? So the gist is that the vice president-elect, Mike Pence, went to a performance of Hamilton the musical on Broadway, and he was greeted there when he arrived by some cheers, some boos. If you watch the video, it's sort of hard to say which one was more prevalent. And at the end of the performance, the cast gets up and gives him a statement saying, "We are representative of diverse America, and we expect you to represent all of us when you're in office." Right? So that was the dominant news story in politics over the weekend. Right? There was a ton of chatter about it on Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. Everybody had an opinion. If you're on the left, you said, like, what a sick burn of Mike Pence. If you're on the right, you said, that's outrageous. Donald Trump tweeted and said that the cast of Hamilton should apologize, and said that theater should be a safe space. And you're sort of left with this feeling of, I don't even know what happened, right? Like, you can go watch the video of it, and you can decide for yourself what happened. Then there's all this noise around it, right? Meanwhile, on Friday afternoon, President-elect Donald Trump settled a lawsuit over Trump University, which was his for-profit college thing, for $25 million, which is something that's never happened in the history of this country before, a president-elect settling a lawsuit for that amount of money as he's entering office. That got almost no attention over the weekend, right? So you have a sort of faux controversy about a Broadway musical, and everybody's hot takes on it, and then you've got a real news story that got very little attention over the weekend. That's sort of that's a microcosm, right? I mean, that's sort of the world we're living in right now. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, you never know the curveball that they're throwing at you. It could be real or it could be fake. That's another reason I don't view it, because, I mean, you see so much stuff, it could be, you know, fake or honest.
Yeah.
You never know which one it is. You can't check another source because the other source can be lying too.
So you don't believe any of it?
I mean, it's hard to.
Anybody else?
It's kind of like the police now. Like, you know, you can trust one and you can't trust the other. It's kind of ballistic.
Anybody else?
Let's talk about it, because this will help Stephen as well. What are some stuff that you all are interested in? What's something that you like, that's interesting, I need to read about that, I need to educate myself about that. I need to click on it. We talked about sports maybe, or
Yeah.
somebody, I think Bree, you said crimes, right?
Yeah.
So how do you, so to relate to kids, what are you doing, how do news cycles try to talk about crime?
I don't think they do. I think, particularly locally, when you look at crime reporting, it's very one-dimensional. It's very much just reactive. And people whose neighborhoods are affected, like y'all are saying, you're gonna look at that, you're gonna click on that. There's no broader story going on there. There's not much broader reporting happening that I see locally. One of the things we try to do is we don't do, so if you have like local news apps on your phone, right, they all have, all those newsrooms have police scanners in there. As soon as something happens, they hear it, right? And then they send you a notification. So you get a notification from the Courier or Wave 3 or somebody, and it says, there was a shooting in downtown Louisville, right? And you click on the story, and it says, there was a shooting in downtown Louisville between these blocks. And that's it, right? You may have to wait, because it takes a while to report out information on a crime. You may have to wait a whole day, a couple days, you may have to wait 2 hours. It sort of depends on what happened for the full story. But that kind of crime reporting is most of what I see around Louisville. I don't see a whole lot more depth than that. We are in the midst of a record number of homicides in Louisville this year, and gun crime is higher than it's ever been in the city. And one of the things we try to do, because we don't cover, at Louisville Public Media, we don't cover crime the same way that TV stations do. It's just a different model. I'm not making a value judgment, I'm just saying that's the reality of it. So when we cover crime, we try to sort of pick the bigger issues that are going on. So we've done a series of stories this year on what is driving the record number of homicides, what is behind the increase in violence that we're seeing here. That's not to say there are any good answers. And it's not to say that our reporting has been conclusive in any way, it hasn't. But it's another approach that we're taking. But are you guys interested in that? I mean, I'm curious what's getting your attention. If it's not politics is presented as blood sport in the media, and it's not getting your attention. So what is? Memes.
I mean, everybody has.
Mine too.
We're all in a digital age where it's on our phones, everything else. I mean, what are you all looking at?
Anything about relationships.
Relationships? Okay.
Music.
Music? Need more entertainment than,
I don't know, it just kind of like just kind of sometimes just random stuff sometimes, if it's like big or if it's like just something you're personally interested in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something you see on Instagram and search about.
Right. Right. Okay. Do you think you were talking a little bit about not having a whole lot of information about politics? Do you think that it's important to know about what the school board is doing here in Louisville? Have you ever read a story about the school board that you didn't find boring?
I know they were gonna fire the superintendent.
Uh-huh.
I read a story about that. That was
So that's a good point, because that's drama, right? There's conflict at the center of that. There's drama at the center of that story. There's something clearly at stake, right? This is the thing in whatever English classes you take and whatever books you read. I mean, this is like the central part of telling a story, right? Is having conflict and drama at the center of it. And if that's there, then it's a lot more interesting, right? What about, like, one of the things we talk about a lot in media is vegetables, right? Like, so eating the sort of stories that are like eat your vegetables, right? There's candy, there's dessert, there's steak, there's whatever, and then there's like broccoli. And we have to figure out in media how to properly season that stuff so that it's Or should we just be able to say, this is important and you should know about it because it pertains to your future?
Now, if you put some good ice cream on there, I don't know.
See?
Like,
On the
just
broccoli?
kind of make it more interesting so
Not-
people
not no
can
vegetable.
actually.
I think the issue is like, people just don't see how it relates to them at all.
Right.
Like, they don't see, if you don't like, if the title is not how it could affect you, or like the way it affects you, then people aren't gonna look at it, because they just see it as just a whole bunch of random information.
Yeah. Okay.
Or if it's so far down the line, people still don't look at it. Like if it can still affect you in like 30 years, people just aren't gonna look at it, because it's too far down the line, they don't see that that far.
Right.
So,
So like a story, a big national story playing out like climate change, right? Like, that's like,
in 100 years, this could happen. Like,
Right.
Nobody's gonna look at that. If
Right.
you say, oh, in maybe the next 6 months,
Be a little
XYZ.
more
Even still, they're not gonna look at it because they don't care.
A lot of people just live in
I
the right
would.
now moment,
Do you
they
have
don't
a
worry
prudent
about like
culture?
what's gonna happen tomorrow or in a month or anything like that. They're just like
Like,
worried about what's going on.
okay. Do you guys or will you vote?
Yeah.
Yeah? No? Sort of a mix. Why and why not?
A lot of people say they don't vote because they feel that their vote doesn't matter because of electoral college. But if you think about it, electoral college, you can't vote without stopping very much. I mean, they can, but they're not gonna go against what they're saying.
A lot of people didn't vote for this election, or they voted third party just because they didn't like
Out of
either
spite.
the candidates, which I understand that, like, where you vote for a different party, not vote at all, but it's kind of like, a vote, you not voting is a vote for someone that you really don't know.
Yeah, this year was not what for protest votes, and not what they for.
It's just,
Protests are like screw us.
So what about local offices?
Only when that's what we get.
Speaking of them, I got a shirt this weekend that says
So-
"Not my governor" with his face on it.
So, city council, for example, or school board, there was a big change in the school board this election cycle because the chairman of the school board got voted out of office.
Donna,
David Jones Jr. was the chair, and a guy named Chris Call beat him. Do you guys think those local offices are important?
Yeah, because that affects us.
Does it affect you more directly than the president?
Yeah. Because it's our community.
Uh-huh.
It's giving us gas.
Uh-huh. Where do you get information about those offices?
Nowhere because,
Teachers?
I mean, all four of the media services go over a lot.
Uh-huh. Which doesn't affect you? What doesn't affect you? School board? What about city council or the governor?
I'm moving to South Carolina. So you can be lynched.
So the point is,
Dang. Do you not realize how racist South Carolina is? I mean, it's a true statement.
Pay attention.
so the point is, what I'm hearing from you guys is that you want highly personalized information, right? You want to know exactly what pertains to you and your neighborhood and your environment, your situation, and everything else you'll kind of decide on based on what's interesting. Is that fair? Yeah.
Do you care if it's factual?
How do you know it's factual?
Don't.
You gotta have to like decide for yourself sometimes, just kind of think about it really.
Mhm.
It's like, is that really true? You have to sit there and ask yourself sometimes.
Yeah. When you read a news story, like, do you get like halfway down and think, wait a minute, where did this come from?
I feel like anybody can take a picture of it and caption it and all of it.
Mm-hmm. And everybody will think it's true. Yeah.
The thing that makes me like the most mad, like when I just like ask why, is when like I'm up to the store and then like little magazine rack on my way, like when I'm checking out, it's just like, oh, so and so lost their beach body, like that type of stuff. I'm like, what is the point? Like, why do you care? Like, you know what I mean? But people still pick it up and read it. It's like that's
Mhm.
going nowhere. Like that story's
Yeah.
not important. But,
Yeah. Right. Right.
or so and so seen walking with so and so. You know, like,
Right.
it's just
glad to hear you guys rejecting that stuff. Because there's a huge market for that in this country. That's why it keeps getting made. It is crap. But, you know, there's also news outlets all across our city, all across our state, who every day are putting in the work to distinguish fact from fiction, who are trying to, when we see something shared on social media that's just a picture and a caption, try to say, be your filter and say, no, that's not true, or yes, that is true, or here's what was actually happening, here's what you can't see out of the frame of the picture that was causing that guy to make that face or do whatever it is, right?
I mean, they can take a picture of one guy sitting in a restaurant and like make it out like he's sitting there, his wife's dead, and he's sitting there lonely, and this happened really, he's just getting a cup of coffee. Like everything's just such a bigger ordeal than it is.
Right. So you kind of have a choice there, right? You can tune that out, and you can ignore it. You can say that it's worthless, or you can say, all right, I'm going to decide that these news outlets have my trust and my attention, right? And I will trust them to help me filter all of this information that's out there, right? Or no? Or do you just like not engage at all?
Oh, yeah.
No, I mean, not directed at you, although, you know, you had brought it up. Like, I think that's a question for everybody. Like, that's the choice you make, right? So do you want to have a news outlet or an organization that is helping you to filter all the information that's out there? One that you trust, that you know, for example, that NPR is going to give you unbiased, fact-based reporting, or the Washington Post is, or the New York Times is, or the Courier Journal is. Is that important to you guys? Or do you just turn it all off?
I think your generation turns most of it off. I mean, right? So how does the media, how would, like for instance, for you, we're dealing with this generation of kids and it's, you know, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, right? They don't like that Snapchats that aren't for reading, right? You're just watching somebody talk. So how does, you can't keep their attention long enough to read an article, or a 2-page article, or however long it is. So how are you all in the media, how do you deal with that kind of changing culture that we're living in?
A couple of things. First, I don't think it's just you.
No, it's not.
When I was, I'm not saying you were saying that, I'm just saying, it's not just you. When I was in high school, it was my generation that was, you know, this sort of like, all right, you're not paying attention, you know, everybody's trying to appeal to you, but you don't care, you know, that everybody's, all of the sort of adults around are trying to figure it out, right? So that's a cycle that happens every generation. One of the things that I think we could do a better job of in media is seeing is reflecting your all's experiences back to you, right? So you always want to see your experience and yourself reflected in media coverage. I mean, that's like, for example, you remember the St. Matthew's Mall riots, all that, remember that? So one of the things we did after some of that initial wave of controversy had passed was find a girl who was there and invite her to come on the radio and talk about what she saw and what her experience was. She came on and she did a piece for about 3 minutes, and she was talking about, no, they got it wrong here, they got it wrong there, here's what actually happened, here's what I saw, here's what my parents said, so on. And we played that on the radio, and it was, it got more clicks and more shares than any story we did all year. I assume that's because people in your all's generation connected with it. I don't know that because I can't see your age when you click on something on our website, but anecdotally, that's what looks like what happened, right? So that's a really direct example of like something that's in your all's world, that's in your all's experience. People who were your all's age were getting so much criticism in local media after that happened, and so much derision. I thought it was really unfair that we decided to get somebody to put them on the radio and say, here's the story in my own words, right? So I think that's one way that media can do a better job of reaching younger people, is being better at reflecting what the experience of being a young person is like right now. and sharing your own stories more. Pretty basic strategy. Something we try to do across a lot of different age groups and other groups.
Where do you see the media going in 5 years, 10 years? Like, what direction do you see as, do you think we're gonna go more towards what Jordan was talking about, the tabloid kind of rhetoric, or do you think we're gonna get, like, where do you think we're going?
Part of the conversation that's happening in media right now is about content, and part of it is about platform. And I think that there are certain platforms that are going to win out. Facebook, Twitter are probably going to win out over a traditional news homepage, right? Apple News, so every iPhone comes with an app now that you can curate all your news in from every source, wherever you want it. Put it all right there in one app, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's nice. I mean, that's a great convenience. It's something that I use, something a lot of people I know use. And I use it in lieu of going to homepages, right? So that's taking clicks away from all of these different news outlets that depend on those clicks as a source of revenue. I think in 5 years or in 10 years, a lot of news reporting on the internet will be filtered through one of those platforms. It'll go away from the traditional kind of homepage model.
Yeah,
and
like
toward that.
like on the iPhones now, like I guess the update, you can just slide left and it shows you all the news from CNN, New York Times, USA Today, and Washington Post. So it makes it easier access for us. So I mean, I can slide left and look at it more.
See it all right there.
And how
It's,
we actually
it's at the
utilize
end
it
though,
though.
rather
Right.
than me having to go look it up. So it's
Right.
easier for me to get the
That's right.
information.
Yeah, it's right there. It updates automatically. You don't have to seek it out. It's there. You can also in that app go in and add local news sources like our website and the Courier Journal's website, all those places, so that they're all feeding into the same place as your stories from the New York Times, Washington Post, all of that. So again, I think that like in terms of platform, those places are going to win out. So featured media there online is probably more of a feed-based kind of thing, where you're going to have your feed wherever, whatever service you choose, and that's where you're going to get your news online. I think there is a real pushback in the past few months against fake news, against this sort of biased news that you're seeing out there. And you're seeing a growing appetite for real, unbiased, reported news and information. Example, the New York Times reported that in like the week after the election, they had 41,000 new subscribers. That's a good sign, because that means people value journalism that is unbiased and done by real reporters, and value information. Those subscriptions are not cheap, so they're placing a dollar value on that. It's what we do at Public Media as well. We get on the radio and we say, hey, you like what we do, give us money. You decide how much money, and that's how we sustain. And we are bringing in as much money as we ever have that way, which gives me a lot of hope for the future. So I do see journalism continuing to. I see news outlets figuring out the platform questions, but I see a lot of resources now, hopefully going toward more reporting, more in-depth reporting. We know there's a market for that.
Stuff that turns me away is like on the news when you slide left it says, for the record, Donald Trump is not good at fractions. Like, I don't care.
Right.
That just makes me not want to even look at news anymore.
Well, so what's behind that is that's somebody making fun of him, right? I mean, that's.
This makes me not want to look at news.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I agree with you. It's not a story. It's not a real story. That's clickbait for liberals.
So I guess it's what
Right.
keep away from, like specific news websites and stuff.
Yeah.
That's how they go down in their market or whatever.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I totally get that. I agree with you.
Do you think the local papers like Courier Journals, for instance, do you think they're going to be obsolete? sooner or later?
No,
Do
I
you
think
they'll thrive, or?
no, I think they're continuing to go through changes to their model. You know, I don't know that the Courier Journal, one of their biggest costs is printing the newspaper every day. And so I don't know that you've seen some daily newspapers scale back there. You know, they pick a day of the week or 2 days of the week, but they're not going to print physical newspapers anymore. I hope that doesn't happen with the Courier Journal. But I think the Courier is as valuable in our community as it's ever been. Doesn't mean people are going to place a value on it by subscribing to it. But I just think that it's as necessary as it's ever been.
Who in here read? Do you get the paper at your house? Do your parents get the paper?
No,
Maybe
we do.
couple,
If I do, it's just that.
What's that?
If I do, it's just that one. That's the only one that like my family does.
Yeah.
don't you have to pay for it when they like take it to your house and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
See, but why would you might pay for it when they get you online and look at it?
Yeah, that's a good
It's
question.
a different generation.
It is, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's, like, getting back to a broader question of media and the internet, I think that was a big mistake that a lot of media outlets made like 15 years ago, giving away their stuff for free online. A lot of them have tried to take it back. New York Times, Washington Post have paywalls now, so you can see like 10 stories and then you are prompted to subscribe. The Courier Journal is that way as well. You can see, I don't know what the number is, maybe 10 as well.
See, but don't they get money from me just clicking on it?
What's that?
Don't they get money for us clicking on it?
No.
They don't?
No, there's a value associated with that. They don't automatically get money for it. And the value is like when they go to a business and say, you know, place an ad here in the middle of however many stories, you'll get a little display ad. They say, we know that 500,000 people read this page last month, and we know that they're of generally, you know, most of them are between 35 and 54, most of them are, you know, make $50,000 a year or less. You know, there's like very basic information associated with like a user profile, but not a specific person. And then they sell that advertising.
They get paid off your subscriptions.
Yes, yes.
And that's why it's going down the toilet, I guess you could say.
So
You
part of
should
the
be on
thing is
TV and why-
everybody is asking that question, right? Like if I can get it for free online, why should I pay for it in print? And a lot of them, like I said, a lot of them are trying to now charge for what they're doing online the same way they charge for what they're doing in print, which I think is a good thing, because I think real journalism has value, and you have to have people who are trained professionals reporting in order to get credible news sources out there. And if you don't pay them, you have no model, right? So I subscribe to the Courier. I have for like my whole life. It was a ritual at my house when I was growing up, you know, like sit around the table and breakfast table in the morning and you're like reading the news and reading sports and catching up on U of L, whatever U of L was doing in my case. You know, we were like big U of L fans in our house. So that's gone, clearly.
It's old news.
It's old news. And there's a lot of different things to replace it, but
TV,
TV, definitely.
free. No subscription.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't have cable.
Just makes it easier.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Good questions.
It's kind of fading away.
Anybody else have any questions, concerns, complaints about how the media may portray certain cases here? I guess, would you just end by talking a little bit about how we talked about before about the media when it deals with hot button issues with race, and how you were talking about your conversation with Dr. Jones?
Yeah, sure.
Why does the media post mostly negative stuff?
Mostly negative stories? Well, that's a good question. I think
It'll attract attention.
it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about conflict. People gravitate toward conflict and drama. And if there are, I think the media's, I think reporters' jobs are to be checks on power in a lot of cases, right? So if you're a government reporter, if you're a political reporter, like you want to, a big part of your job is keeping powerful people in check, right? Holding them accountable to what they say publicly. and that manifests a lot as negative.
Donald Trump, he said all kinds of stuff, but
Mhm.
he's very diplomatic, and it's crazy.
So one of the things that we are not great at in the media, 4 minutes, okay, is talking about race. And this is a conversation that is happening in this country right now. I just wanted to share a little bit about how we go about it. So one of the things that that the national media has been talking a lot about is normalization of racist rhetoric in media coverage. So what that means is like when it's a big part of it is using words or terms that are a little more palatable to people than what the actual meaning of them is. So alt-right instead of white nationalism, for example. That's like a really prominent one right now. I had a guy named Ricky Jones come on the radio not long ago. Ricky is head of Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville. He's an expert source on a lot of issues surrounding race. And he came on and we talked about it on the radio. For 10 minutes or so, we talked about this normalization, this rhetoric, how it's happening. How do you have a conversation, an informed conversation about race in this country, when a lot of times people just shut it down right away? One of the things he said was we need to create spaces in the media to have these in-depth conversations in context, because part of the problem right now is as soon as you bring it up, people accuse you of being a racist, right? Like, hey, you brought it up. I wasn't saying it. We broadcast this piece, and immediately I got calls from people saying, "You're spreading division in our community. You brought up race. That in and of itself is an act of racism," and you just get nowhere, right? So I don't think that's the majority opinion. I think most of our listeners, for example, we have about 220,000 listeners in the area. I think the majority of our listeners want this kind of informed discussion and tell us they want it, but you do have people out there who say, we can't be talking about this because it's hard or it's impolite or whatever. I think, my personal opinion is, it's more important than ever to have these conversations and have them out in the open, and have them publicly. So, that's one of the things we're trying to do, have an open and honest conversation about some of these pressing issues in our country right now.
Any final questions, comments? Anybody? Okay. Well, I really appreciate you coming in to discuss some of that. You did on a lot of it.
Thanks.